Graham, can you talk to us a little bit about, I think everybody has a general idea of what a composer does, but I think that's just sort of scratching the surface of what you're responsible for, so can you give us some insight into that?
Sure. So, any music that's not licensed is what I'm making. And I think we're going to talk about timeline a bit, but I like to be in as early as possible. But you often get a temp or some kind. You used to do a spotting session where you'd watch it without a temp and then talk about where things were going to go. That rarely happens nowadays, at least not in my experience. And so I'm more likely to get something with temps that essentially tell me what the rough outline of a cue sheet is. And then I'm going to go through it and replace all those. The person I talk with the most early on is the director for what they're looking for. Everyone has different, it's very difficult to talk about with music, even with musicians, and actually know that you're on the same page. And so, having actual references that are actual music as opposed to concepts like moody to one person, maybe something's totally different, and hopeful for somebody, maybe totally different. And so at the same time, usually don't want to be like, oh, well, how about a Mixolydian scale? Like you're not going to get that technical either. And so starting that conversation about palette and feel early. Are there time period references? The music can give so much information about time and place, and in addition to emotion and all these things that you often associate with it. And so if you're going to be giving time information, or you're going to muddy the time waters by the way you approach it, and we've all heard sci-fi movies where they make music of the future that sounds so much of music of the past just a couple of years later. So this conversation about palette early on is really important. Getting to know what the director wants, what the story wants, what the needs are. And you're guessing at first, because if you have a script or just these conversations are just a description of the project, what gets filmed and what comes out of the editing room might, in the end, be very different. So you have to be ready to adapt to what the actual reality of the film is. And so then you start making sketches, and every process. I do a lot of collaboration, all sorts of mediums, and for me, the first step of any process is figuring out what the process is going to be. Deciding, an important decision is, when are you going to share music? If you bring it to full completion, you put everything, and you throw in a bunch of budget on making this perfect cue, and then they listen to it for 3 seconds, they're like, no. Well, you just wasted a whole bunch of budget and a whole bunch of time, and you're going to be discouraged. But if you send in a little rough sketch with a bunch of MIDI that doesn't sound very good, and say, just imagine, it's going to sound great, but it's not really helpful either. So somewhere in between those things is the thing that you want to actually share, and it really depends on who's listening. Do they want just a light sketch so they can really get into the discussion from the ground zero? Or should you just do 1 or 2 very important cues and get them to at least pretty close so they can give you real feedback? Finding that place, and then you go back and forth with iterations until you're done. And it can be a long time, because unless your contract has a set number of iterations, until the director says approved on every cue, you're not done. And so you're on it until everybody's happy.